What if we'll come up with a really cool name for it later, but we want CJ to tap into his big brain of his and go through a trade that almost happened or free agent signing or some hockey move that may have been significant enough to alter the course of our universe, let alone the hockey universe. But yeah, it'd be fun if you could just bring up something that could blow our minds. We're going to try to do this as often as we can on Thursday.
I'm going to take you back to the 90s.
Sure.
It was a simpler time in the world.
You're telling me.
You weren't carrying around a computer in your pocket and texting your buddies all day. And a goaltender by the name of Patrick Roy.
Yeah,
famously gets shelled in a game at the Montreal Forum against the Detroit Red Wings. I think it was a 12-1 loss. Ultimately, I think he was in for 9 of the goals. And somewhat famously, and I'm sorry, kids, if you're unfamiliar with this, literally in the middle of the game after getting pulled and being upset that he was left in for so many of the goals, went to Ronald Corey at the time, who was sitting just behind the bench, and basically demanded a trade. And, we're talking about a goaltender at that point who had already won 2 Stanley Cups in 86 and 93 with the Canadiens, was still pretty much on the top of his game. And, that prompted a 3 or 4 day period where he was made available to a number of teams. And believe it or not, the team that that was at least as involved as Colorado in the talks was Detroit. And why this is significant, first of all, was Detroit that shelled him in the game that ultimately led to the breaking point. But secondly, is Detroit instead saw him traded to Colorado. And this is at a time when Detroit was in the Western Conference. He gets traded to Colorado, of course, wins the Stanley Cup immediately in that first season in 1996, the spring of 1996 with the Avalanche. And over the next 6-7 years, the Avalanche and Red Wings absolutely hated each other, had some epic playoff series, had to go through each other. And the reason when Colorado had success in those instances was Patrick Roy most often. I mean, obviously they had Forsberg and Sakic and a killer blue line and lots of other great players. But I just think it's funny that the could have or should have, had Detroit did pretty well, because after that, they won the Cup, of course, in 97, 98, 2002, and 2008. But maybe there would have been a chance to even win more than that with Patrick Roy had they pulled the trigger. So that was one that could have been and didn't happen. And I'm sure there's a little bit of a what if in a few people's minds that were in the middle of being able to potentially pull off that transaction.
The one thing I can't get over, it's not just the winning. Those two teams hated each other with a passion, to the point that it became a subject of an E60 on ESPN a few years ago. Could you imagine a really good one? Could you imagine Patrick Roy in a Detroit Red Wings jersey beating up guys on the Avs? But also, do they lose out on a cup if he doesn't go to that team? What does the viability of hockey in Colorado stand if they don't win that cup in 96 and 2001?
Right. And then, this is really appealing to boomers of our pod, but there was a pretty famous point where Curtis Joseph was a Leafs, standout goaltender for the Leafs, and he left in free agency. I'm going to call it in 2003. I hope I'm right on that. Maybe it was 2002, actually. And he signed with Detroit on a big money deal. And that didn't work out for the Red Wings or for Curtis. But maybe he stays a Leaf instead of leaving for Detroit if they have Patrick Roy at that time. I mean, this is hopefully, and I'll give us some more current ones in future weeks. But this is like the butterfly effect of you can never know, because, there's a set of decisions that follow each decision that's made. And, when there's a big player that could have went one or two ways, I think of the Lindros deal where the Rangers thought they had him and he ends up going to Philadelphia. There's a what if there, if it goes one way or the other, which players, this is the fun of sports. It's imperfect. It involves humans. And yeah, I was just thinking of Patrick Roy this week, of course, because seeing him behind the bench with the Islanders now.